Okay, well, we're very pleased to have Maureen as our speaker today. And Maureen is the widow of the New Testament scholar, Professor I. Howard Marshall. She earned her PhD from the University of Aberdeen and was president of Evangelical Seminary of Hong Kong before she relocated to Scotland. In 2019, she set up the Christian International Training Center in Edinburgh to train lay leaders for Chinese churches in the UK. And I'd only add this note. We had Yin Chuan give a lecture 2 weeks ago, and he talked about the absolute importance of the work that you're doing, Maureen, in terms of theological education and preparing pastors for ministry here in the UK, which is an incredible need, seeing the great growth of the churches, Chinese churches here in the UK. So we're just really looking forward to this talk and for what you have to share with us in that regard. And so with that, Maureen, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Let me show my PowerPoint first.
Go ahead and share screen.
Yes. Can you all see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay, that's good. So thank you, Tom, for your kind words. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. It is my honor to be invited by OCMS to speak at your Montague Barker lecture. My paper is entitled Chinese Theological Education in the UK, Past, Present, and Future. I should start with the disclaimer. I have not made any systematic research or empirical study on the history of Chinese theological education in the UK. My comments below are based purely on my limited experience studying and living in the UK for over 10 years, at times with a comparison with theological education in Hong Kong, where I come from. My purpose is not to give you a comprehensive picture of the topic, but to raise some issues that are worth considering. I would welcome information that can either consolidate or modify my views. I would also welcome discussion on matters related to Chinese theological education in the UK, a subject close to my heart. Let me see if I can control my PowerPoint. It doesn't go. So,
are you sure? Try your cursor keys.
My cursor, okay. My cursor. Okay.
Or down at the bottom.
Okay, all right, now.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
It works now. Chinese theological education in general. I would like to begin my talk with a definition of what I mean by theological education. By theological education, I mean the conscious and systematic impartation of knowledge about God, the Christian faith, and the Bible, with the purpose of transforming or nurturing the growth of Christian lives. The two words, conscious and systematic, confine such impartation to more formal settings and do not cover more casual settings such as conversations or friends over the dining table or parents talking to their children at home. By Chinese theological education, I refer to such impartation that is done using Chinese as the medium of instruction. Roughly speaking, modern theological education, whether it be Chinese or other languages, is usually conducted in 4 levels, which are presented in the diagram on the slide. At the base of the diagram is a church level. In most Chinese churches all over the world, there is some sort of theological education going on. Programs such as Sunday school, baptismal class, small group Bible studies, Bible camps, retreats, and conferences are offered to nurture lay Christians. Then the second level. At times, some churches train leaders of their own church. Some churches have well-structured training for their lay leaders. Some mega churches in Hong Kong are so resourceful that they can even set up theological colleges of their own. However, most churches in Hong Kong rely on theological colleges to train their leaders. The colleges often offer evening programs to those working people, while the churches in return support these colleges through finance and recommending their members to enroll in these schools. Such partnership has been a win-win arrangement. Going up one level is training for would-be pastors. About 30 or 40 years ago, such training was usually done in theological colleges in Hong Kong. Various denominations set up their theological colleges, although their students are not limited to their own denominations. Placements were usually arranged with supporting churches. Recently, some mega churches in Hong Kong have become so resourceful that they set up their own theological schools. In Hong Kong, there are over 40 theological schools. On the top level, Chinese pastors or students of the Bible continue their theological education in the universities or theological colleges with a view to becoming scholars. In the past, the bulk of them went from Asia to Europe or America for further studies. This is true of Hong Kong as well as other Asian countries like Taiwan, Singapore, Malaysia, and the Philippines. Recently, doctoral programs are also offered by universities and theological colleges in Hong Kong. Now, Chinese theological education in the UK. What about the picture in the UK? We do not see such a neat development as shown in the diagram. In the past, until 3 or 4 years ago, Chinese theological education in the UK was on the whole underdeveloped. The phenomenon is a very intricate one. Paradoxically, although for years streams of Chinese scholars have been coming to the UK from Asia for doctoral studies, Chinese theological education in the UK have not flourished as a result. We know that universities of Oxford, Cambridge, London, Manchester, Edinburgh, St. Andrews, and Aberdeen, etc., attract a lot of Chinese theological students. However, these Chinese scholars do not seem to have left a lasting theological heritage in the UK. The main reason is that most of these Chinese scholars go back to their home countries after their doctoral studies to teach in seminaries and theological colleges. Dr. Khalida Chu, who is also Montagu Barker Lecture speaker this year, is a rare exception. Take the example of Hong Kong and myself. There are over 40 seminaries in Hong Kong. Until about 10 years ago, there are many openings for lecturers with PhD degrees. I did my doctoral studies in Aberdeen in the 1990s. When I was in Aberdeen, I worshipped in a local church in order to be exposed to local culture. Only once in a while did I attend the Chinese church in Aberdeen. One of my fellow PhD students, also from Hong Kong, attended the Chinese church. She helped out with preaching and leading Bible studies. However, when we both graduated and left, we did not seem to have left much of a mark in the Chinese church. Neither of us once contemplated ministering in the UK. My heart was in Hong Kong at that time, and I returned to teach at Evangel Seminary, Hong Kong. So were our fellow PhD students from Taiwan and Singapore. They all left for home countries after completing their studies in the UK. In a word, Chinese scholars who study in the UK did not exert a great impact on Chinese theological education because there was a lack of platform for them to teach in a Chinese theological college in the UK. Their influence in the Chinese churches in the UK are mainly confined to their publications in Chinese, their online talks, and infrequent visits to the UK. The fact was that there was virtually no fully established Chinese theological college in the UK when I graduated in 1999. COCM, that is Chinese Overseas Christian Mission, the largest Chinese mission organization in the UK, began their 2-year pastoral work diploma in 1998, then changed into COCM Bible College, offering bachelor degree in 2003. This program was later suspended until COCM launched their partnership with Canadian Chinese School of Theology in 2020. Most of the Chinese churches remained small and weak and were not in a position to support the establishment of local Chinese theological colleges, unlike the situation in Hong Kong. Chinese Christianity in the UK suffered from a long-standing shortage of Chinese pastors. A few of the Chinese pastors in the UK were educated in local English theological colleges like Reverend Clement Tang of Luton Chinese Christian Church and Reverend Benny Cho of Leeds Chinese Gospel Church. But the majority of Chinese pastors were imported from Asia. Pastoral recruitment from overseas was no easy task, and thus many Chinese churches did not have a pastor for years. Under such circumstances, Chinese theological education in all levels suffered from a vicious cycle. The lack of Chinese pastors meant that Chinese pastors were often overloaded and could not have sufficient time in offering theological education to their congregation, which in turn made it harder to raise up mature church leaders. This hindered the growth of strong churches. With most Chinese churches remaining scattered and weak, they could not support the establishment of local Chinese theological institutions, which in an ideal situation should have partnered with churches to train lay leaders as well as pastors. The lack of locally based Chinese theological schools meant that locally raised pastors and mature church leaders were difficult to come by. The vicious cycle went on and on. Present. This grim situation of Chinese theological education in the UK is now experiencing a breakthrough. The appearance of a new locally based Chinese theological college may well signal a new phase in Chinese theological education in the UK. The Christian International Training Center, CITC, was set up in Edinburgh in 2019 to train lay leaders for the Chinese churches in the UK. This is where my story comes in. I relocated from Aberdeen to Hong Kong in 2017 after the passing of my late husband, Howard Marshall, thinking that I would never return to the UK. However, while I was in Hong Kong, I felt the call from God to set up a Chinese theological college in Scotland. I was burdened by the lack of theological institutions in the UK. Since I had been a theological administrator in Hong Kong for nearly a decade, I thought I could put my experience into good use. CITC is the first Chinese theological college in Scotland. Its vision is to train lay leaders for the Chinese churches. Its base is in Edinburgh. It is also the only locally based Chinese theological school in the UK that uses Cantonese as medium of instruction, with simultaneous translation into Mandarin. For those of you who don't know Chinese, let me sidetrack a little bit to explain our language. Our written Chinese language is the same all over the world, except that mainland China uses simplified characters, whereas Taiwan and Hong Kong use the traditional characters. However, our spoken language varies. The Chinese in mainland China and Taiwan, they speak Mandarin, or called Putonghua in mainland China, which is the official language. The Chinese from southern China, for example, Hong Kong, speak a Cantonese dialect. So there are both Mandarin speaking and Cantonese speaking in the UK. CITC is the first Chinese theological school in the UK that uses Cantonese as medium of instruction with translation into Mandarin. COCM, CCST, and GETS, Theological Seminary International, currently use Mandarin as medium of instruction. So against such background, you can see that the setting up of CITC is an important breakthrough. Before COVID, we rented the premises of a local church to offer both physical and online classes. During COVID, all our classes have gone online. In the long run, we hope to adopt the hybrid model again. Currently, we offer certificates and diploma programs that can be taken full-time or part-time. We partner with Evangel Seminary of Hong Kong to offer a certificate in biblical studies. We have also just launched the Pastoral Enhancement Program. Up till 2021, our students are mainly Chinese who have lived in the UK for quite a number of years. They include church leaders like church deacons, worship leaders, Bible study group leaders, students, professionals, and retired people. From last year onwards, we have enrolled some newly immigrated people from Hong Kong. This new batch of students are highly motivated and intelligent. Zoom classroom discussions become very lively. Looking back, the timing of the setting up of CITC in July 2019 was providential. It was pre-COVID and pre-BNO immigration influx. BNO means British National Overseas. In just about a year after CITC was set up, the influx of Hong Kongers to the UK began. By now, it is estimated that more than 140,000 Hong Kongers have migrated to the UK. It was as if CITC was meant to prepare for the wave of Cantonese-speaking immigrants. We are trying to keep in pace with the development of British Chinese Christianity to see if there is a need for CITCs to start pastoral training programs. It is worthy of note that CITC is mainly funded by donors in Hong Kong, only secondarily by churches in the UK. In other words, the breakthrough in Chinese theological education in UK occurred as a result of partnership between churches in Hong Kong and those in the UK. CITC is able to tap into the financial resources of churches in Hong Kong. The development of Chinese theological education becomes a mission of churches in Hong Kong. This will increasingly be the case as Chinese diaspora continues to grow in the UK, whose link with home city Hong Kong is anything but strong. Chinese theological education in the UK in the future. Chinese theological education has now entered a new phase. The scene is undergoing steady but dramatic change with the influx of immigrants from Hong Kong, many of them Christians. Some remote Chinese churches experience a twofold increase in Sunday school attendance. It is mind-blowing that in larger cities like London and Manchester, the increase is 9 or even 10-fold. Not just the number of Chinese Christians are growing, but also the number of Chinese churches too. Take the example of Edinburgh again. Before the immigration influx, there were 3 small Chinese churches in Edinburgh. Now there are 6, and they are larger churches. The implications for Chinese theological education are manifold. At the grassroots level, the influx provides greater human resources for Chinese theological education for lay Christians. Among the new batch of Christians, many are mature Christians, and not a few are pastors. Although not all pastors can find a pastoral position, they, together with many mature Christians, provide a pool of volunteers for church ministries. Already, we know many such Christians are teaching in Sunday schools, leading worships, and Bible studies. Take the example of Edinburgh Chinese Christian Church, of which I am the advisor. Before the immigration influx, the congregation was around 30 people. Within the last 2 years, the congregation has grown to 100. So it's 3-fold increase. There is only one pastor in our church. Half of his salary is paid by ECCC, but the remaining half is supported by his sending churches in Hong Kong. It is impossible for him to feed the congregation single-handedly. Fortunately, there are many mature Christians among the newcomers. Among them, 3 of them were pastors in Hong Kong. Now, these 3 pastors offer voluntary help in leading a youth group, a Bible study, and a couples group. In this way, theological education at the grassroots level has the prospect to grow. Then up one level. The large number of mature Christians also signals a greater demand for higher theological education and possibly pastoral training. With the growing market in the UK, both online and on-site theological training are beginning to flourish. The development of online instruction is developing exponentially. Many theological colleges in Hong Kong, hitherto concentrating their work in Hong Kong, now begin to look to the UK for expansion and development. Numerous online programs, online training sessions, webinars, etc. are now on offer to Chinese Christians in the UK. And actually, not just the UK, but worldwide. They are sometimes free of charge, attracting many Chinese Christians to join or enroll, thus forging close ties between Hong Kong theological colleges and the Hong Kong diaspora in the UK. And then up one more level. At the same time, there is the opportunity for locally based theological colleges to flourish, helping to equip the next generation of Chinese pastors. I was recently told by a pastor in Birmingham that about 20 young Chinese Christians dedicated their lives to full-time ministry in 2 Easter conferences in England. These devoted young people need Chinese pastoral training if they do not feel confident in doing theological education in English. A great gap currently exists, as there is no pastoral training using Cantonese as medium of instruction. COCM Bible College is thus hoping to introduce Cantonese programs. CITC is also considering the need of launching a professional degree equivalent to a Bachelor of Divinity in the UK or a Master of Divinity in Hong Kong. Some seminaries in Hong Kong are even considering the possibility of setting up branch schools in the UK. In the foreseeable future, we may see the setting up of new Chinese theological schools in the UK. If this is the case, Chinese scholars doing doctoral studies in the UK may have more opportunities to stay on in the UK to teach in Chinese theological colleges in the UK instead of going back to the home countries. Their influence on British Chinese Christianity will then be more direct. At the same time, the immigration influx prepares the soil for parachurch organizations to bloom, helping to provide greater resources to biblical studies, church ministry, missions, and various types of ministries. On the one hand, some parachurch organizations in Hong Kong are setting up new branches in the UK. An example is the Missionary Society Frontiers, which launched the new UK office in Glasgow last year. On the other hand, brand new organizations spring up to meet the various needs of British Chinese Christians. Examples are the Institute for Christian Education, which aims at promoting biblical values and living among British Chinese Christians, Amazing Counseling House to offer Cantonese counseling service, Hong Kong Well UK to provide support to students, parents, and teachers. It is no exaggeration to say that Chinese parachurch organizations are mushrooming in the UK. Implications for British Christianity. Steadily but surely, there will be development of all levels of theological education in the UK. Not only will British Chinese Christianity be able to slowly break the vicious cycle of stagnancy, it will also become a more significant voice in the community. Ultimately, British Christianity will also be influenced as different levels of theological education seek to collaborate or dialogue with local partners. In the church level, more Chinese churches are collaborating with local churches in offering Sunday schools and youth programs. Not a small percentage of Hong Kong Christians choose to worship in local churches. As a result, many local churches are responding to this change by taking on serving these Chinese newcomers. Take the instance of Caribous Chinese Christian Center in Edinburgh. There are now about 10 new Hong Kong families in their congregation. A fellowship group targeted at this group has been formed to help them integrate into the church. I heard that a few Methodist churches in England are supporting the setting up of a Chinese service within their church. The demographics of local church are thus changing. In the level of theological schools, CITC is seeking to collaborate with local schools like Nazarene Theological College in Manchester. On the top level of scholars, the presence of more Chinese scholars in the UK will also facilitate the dialogue between British and Chinese scholarship. Such interactions between British local Christianity and British Chinese Christianity will bound to accelerate as the second generation of British Chinese come of age. The next generation of Chinese will be more fluent in English than in Chinese. Their presence in either the local churches or in the English congregations of the Chinese churches will definitely bring them closer partnership with British Christianity. To prevent them from being caught between British culture on the one hand and Chinese culture on the other, pastors and church leaders should pay special attention to preparing them to merge into local Christianity. Conclusion. All these mean that the prospects of Chinese theological education are positive. However, such a golden age may last perhaps only 3 or 4 decades. The scene will be very different with the passing of the first generation or the first 1.5 generation of BNOs. We have to be psychologically prepared for this short-lived bloom. CITC, in calling ourselves Christian International Training Center, is prepared to shift to English or adding English as a medium of instruction as years go by. Although our input into Chinese theological education may serve only 1 generation or more, it is worth the effort. When David had served God's purpose in his own generation, he fell asleep, Acts 13:36. If we can serve God's purpose in our own generation, it is no small thing. The audience is thus challenged to seize the opportunities to participate in this growth and expansion of Chinese theological education in the UK. So here ends my talk. It's a little bit shorter than expected, perhaps, but perhaps that will leave us with more time to discuss. So I'll stop.
Well, thank you, Maureen. Now, if you want to ask the questions online, go down and at the bottom, there's a reactions button, and you push that, and then it'll say raise hand, and then we will see that on the screen, and I will call on you, as well as questions here. But I usually get things going, Maureen, and I'm, in one sense, really excited about this development. I work with a Chinese fellowship here in Oxford that's seen the very growth that you brought forth in your talk. But my question is this. One of the things in this move from Hong Kong to the UK, a lot of that is people are not planning to go back and they're planning to stay here. But one of the issues then is that means, and this was been an issue for many Chinese who come from overseas and come to a new country, is there now beginning to build up the kind of financial support and institutional support to help to build and establish theological institutions that will train this generation coming over and future generations? And is that support showing up in terms of support of pastors? Because one of the things that each one brought out is that even though Hong Kong Chinese tend to do very well economically when they come to the UK in relationship to other immigrant groups, but that support has been lacking for pastors. And so many students don't want to go into that profession because they're afraid they're not going to be able to raise a family and be able to continue on in their life here in the UK. So those two questions, one in terms of institutions and individuals who are supporting theological education, but also who the church is in supporting pastors to be able to provide a real living wage and one that will be able to fund them for many years of faithful service.
Tom, thank you for your very good questions. Actually, the two questions are related. In terms of financial giving, you are exactly right to say that these Hong Kong immigrants are better off than most other ethnic groups migrating into the UK. But the problem is that we find that financial donation to churches or to theological institution like CITC has not increased accordingly. The main reason are these new immigrant families, they are very new to the country. So in these first 2 years of 3, I would guess, they are trying to establish their root in the UK. So they tend not to give that much. They have to hold their reserve. Many of them have not been able to find a job immediately. So they are living on their living. So they have to spend their savings on buying a house, establish their certain, lifestyle, taking care of their children, buying a car, and so on. So they tend not to give so unreservedly. And also there is the problem of identity and sense of belonging. Many of these new Hong Kongers, when they come to the churches in the UK, they do not immediately identify themselves with the churches in the UK. Many of them still have their ties with Hong Kong, especially now with the Zoom link and online services. Take, for example, of a Hong Kong family which had moved to London. This family are still having Zoom meetings 3 times a week with their home church in Hong Kong. So in a sense, although they worship in the London church now, they are still keeping close contact with their churches in Hong Kong. So their sense of identity or sense of belonging is still very much Hong Kong. And also some of the people that have come into our Chinese church, say, for example, churches have been increased in their number by 3-fold, 4-fold, or even 10-fold. They sometimes have not really made up their mind. Sometimes some are still church hopping. Say, for example, there are now 5 or 6 churches in Edinburgh now, Chinese churches. Sometimes they will want to try this one church out first, and then the next one, and then the next one. So they haven't really settled in one church. So all these factors adding up, although they are financially much stronger than perhaps other ethnic groups, I'm afraid their givings are still not as ideal as we expect. So return to the example of Edinburgh Chinese Christian Church, of which I'm the advisor, as I told you just now. Our pastor's salary, half of it is raised from Hong Kong. So of course, I would think, well, if there are so many people in our church now, our 100 people should be able to support one pastor, right? But it's not true. Currently, our income has not been sufficient to support the salary of one pastor. So although we really want to hire at least one more half-time pastor, we are still struggling. Yeah. So not to mention theological colleges. If they do not donate to the Chinese churches, in turn, the Chinese churches as an institution or as a church will not be financially strong to support theological colleges. So I'm afraid the situation may have to wait for at least 4 to 5 years before there will be improvements. So for the time being, unfortunately, we are still relying a lot on Hong Kong churches. So Tom, have I been able to answer your questions?
Very good answers, Maureen. So next to you, Marina.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Maureen, for the presentation. And I think you're doing really good work. And as you said, I mean, like, I've never heard of such a theological colleges, being from the global south, being instituted in a global north institution in the language of a global south. So I think it's really a great work. But I have some questions. And you touch on some of the questions that I already have, which you respond to, Tom. You talked about, sense of identity and sense of belonging. So I was wondering, when you deal with younger generations now, younger generations who are born and who have studied in the UK, how would that relate with the older generations who have come as adults to the UK? Is there a difference in their way of thinking, and their perspective? So that's what I wanted to, that's one of my questions. And also I was wondering, I do not want to problematize by using the word integrate, but in the sense of how do this, the students integrate in UK, which has become their host country? Is there any effort to uh, to work and collaborate with churches in the UK, and with churches in the UK, or local churches, I would say, English, or yeah, with other churches in the UK, or is it creating some sort of, I'm wondering whether it's creating some sort of an insular community who is looking inward and not really looking outward in the context where they are the minority and migrants?
Yes, Marina, thank you for your two very good questions. The first question about the locally born Chinese and the older generation. Certainly, there's a very great gap. We have already seen it before this migration influx. So before this migration influx, the first generation of Chinese in the UK, most of them, if they are Cantonese speaking, they are restaurant people. They either work in a restaurant or they are restaurant owners. So they are in the catering business, okay? So their mindset is very much grassroots, very much inward looking. Those, the first generation, did not speak English well, still with a very strict mindset of what Chinese culture should be like. And then the locally born Chinese, their children, grew up on the one hand in their very traditional Chinese family, on the other hand in very free UK schools. So many of them are caught between the two cultures. These younger generation, if they are Christians, they usually find it very hard to identify with either local church or Chinese church. Take, for example, of my friends, Samuel. Okay, Samuel is about 30 years old now. When he considered whether he would want to be baptized, he had a struggle. Would he want to be baptized in a local church, which he was attending, or in his parents' church, which is a Chinese church, in which he helped out with the English service? You know what I mean? So he was helping out in the Chinese church, the English service. At the same time, he himself attended a local church in the morning. So he attended a local church in the morning to get nurture, to get Bible teaching. In the afternoon, he attended the Chinese church to serve, okay? So when he was getting ready to be baptized, he was at a loss. Where is my identity? Shall I be baptized in the local church, or shall I be baptized in the Chinese church? He did not feel he can identify totally with either one of them. He did not have very, very good friends in the local church. But on the other hand, he could not completely identify with the Chinese church because he didn't read Chinese. So after a long struggle, finally, he decided to get baptized in the Chinese church. So that is to show that previously, there was already a great gap between the first generation of immigrants and the next generation. Now, we want to talk about this new wave. This new immigration wave is a little bit different because this new wave, the first generation Chinese, some of them are very well educated. Some of them can master English very well. So that's why some of these new immigrants, they will choose to attend a local church because they have no problem with English. But of course, the majority of this first generation of Hong Kongers still choose to attend a Chinese church. Now, we as church leaders are also struggling. Say, for example, the families, they are usually young families. Their children usually are primary schools children or secondary school children. So our struggle is, shall we offer Sunday school in English or in Chinese? Okay, that is our problem. So currently in our church, Edinburgh Chinese Christian Church, we offer Sunday school in Cantonese, in Chinese, using English material. So we use English material, but then our Sunday school teachers, because they themselves cannot speak English so fluently, they themselves are usually also Hong Kong immigrants, so they can manage Cantonese better. So our medium of instruction is still Cantonese, but the material is in English. So right now, currently, it's still okay, all right? But then within a few years, we will anticipate a problem. We will anticipate the problem when some of the children have got so used to English in their schools that they will find attending Chinese Sunday school incomprehensible. That's the problem of some Chinese families who have stayed here for a longer time. Their children have been going to English schools now, and they cannot join our Sunday school because our Sunday school is still in Cantonese. So they have to instead choose to go to local church again, although the parents emotionally, they still want to come to our Chinese church. And I know that some Chinese church, say, for example, Nottingham Chinese Christian Church, they choose to use English straight through for all of their Sunday school levels. So this is some things we have to struggle in terms of languages. Okay, that's my answer to your first question. Is that all right for the time being for the first question? Okay, then I'll move on to the second generation about integration. Yes, sometimes we find it hard for our Chinese children to integrate into local schools. In some instances, not all, there will be bullying problems and so on. There are organizations set up to help them. The example that I gave you just now, I mentioned to you a new parachurch organization, which is called Hong Kong Well, UK. This is a counseling organization offering counseling to students, to parents, when they find there are adjustment problems for their children in the schools, then they will go to this parachurch counseling service. And I know there are many more parachurch organizations. Some of them I don't even know. They have formed groups. They have formed some organization, formed groups of high school Hong Kong Chinese students for them to get together, discuss their problems and so on, to help them handle the difficulties. Of course, their ultimate goal is not to build an inward-looking network. That is not their aim. Their aim is to help them integrate into their schools. But for the time being, in the transition period, they need a lot of support. Okay, so actually there are a lot of societies or organizations being set up to help children and parents. And even CITC, for example, last year we held a webinar. We invite 2 UK educators to explain the UK system, school system, on how UK schools teach family education. So we offer training information, provide information to parents. So actually, many churches and organizations are doing what we can to help them.
Okay,
Of course,
Maureen,
there is the Hong Kong ready churches. Many UK churches have signed up to be Hong Kong ready churches to help out. Many of the UK churches, local churches, offer English classes to children, to parents, and so on. So they have been very hospitable. We really appreciate these churches.
Go to David.
so thank you very much, Maureen, for your very informative lecture. Now, I want to raise two questions. First one is about the Chinese church relationship with the local churches. Peter Cottrell, who used to be the principal of London Bible College, later called London School of Theology, he came to the Chinese church to preach when I was worshiping there. And he was quite willing to come to a Chinese church to preach. But when I was studying there, I heard him saying, well, he questioned, this is a very fundamental and daring question that he was questioning. He questioned whether ethnic churches should exist, because he was very much against the church growth movement, the homogeneous principle. And so he was really asking a very big questions. Almost an ontological question, whether the Chinese church should exist in a foreign land. Should we not mix with all the local Christians? And so that is a very fundamental question. In the long term, I mean, I can understand for the time being, the new immigrant, they need to go to Chinese churches, but from the long term, if we follow the New Testament pattern, should we really still have ethnic churches, or should we be like churches in Rome or Ephesus, where the Jews and Gentiles are worshiping together? So that is a fundamental theological question. My second question is about training Chinese scholar to the PhD level. That is, okay, well, we need to train potential pastors. Yeah, that can be done at the bachelor level or MDiv level. But how about training, biblical or theological scholars at the PhD level, so that they can in turn teach this student at the lower level? That's all. I don't have a third question this time.
Sorry, I cannot get your second question. What is your second question about
My second
training?
question, how about training this Chinese scholar to the PhD level, so that they can in turn to become professors or lecturers in Chinese seminaries?
Are you saying that that we should do this, training Chinese scholars so that they can teach in Chinese institutions? Is that what you meant?
Yeah, I mean, it's a question. Should we do that?
Oh, okay, I see what you mean. Okay, the first question about whether ethnic churches should ever exist, that is $1 million question, a very good question. Please bear in mind that my late husband was a Brit. He asked me the same question. We live under one roof, and he asked me, and then he challenged me, why do you have a Chinese church? And my late husband was a Methodist. Okay. Now, theoretically, personally, my ideal, I would say the best model in the UK is an international church. An international church is the model that I personally is upholding and pushing if I have the chance. I believe in an international church. In a sense, it's not just a local church. I prefer saying an international church to a local church. The reason being, an international church will have the image of having all nationalities under one roof, which is better than a local church just happened to be so hospitable to the Hong Kongers. Now, say, for example, I take my personal story as an example. When I was in Aberdeen, I went to Methodist church with my late husband. His Methodist church was very hospitable. Of course, it was English speaking. I, as an Asian, felt very welcome, okay? And in their church leadership, there were Nigerians, Africans, who held leadership position. So the church was actually very hospitable and very open. But somehow, me personally, I don't feel really completely at home because I just feel I'm a guest that is being welcome in a local church. I didn't feel the church is my church. I didn't feel it is an international church, although there are a number of nationalities in a church. You know what I mean? It is still a local church. We just happen to be very hospitable.
Yeah, I understand.
So my model that I will uphold is an international church with English as the service, the language, okay? And then with different, perhaps groups, with Chinese groups, with Indians groups, and so on. That is personally my ideal. But we have to work with reality. In reality, many Chinese cannot handle English. Especially before this immigration influx. You cannot expect the restaurant people, Chinese restaurant people, to attend an English service. And even though they grow in an English service, their English is not good enough for them to be able to minister in a church. So they can never feel that they can have a place in a church. They cannot serve, you know, their English is not good enough. So that's why, because of the need to have Chinese to help them integrate, we had this Chinese church. Now, before the immigration influx, it was predicted that the Chinese churches will die out in the UK in 10 years. Because after all the first generation of Chinese pass away, there's no more Chinese, right? And then suddenly, with this new influx, the scene is changed again. There are so many new first generation Chinese. Who you have to bear in mind is not just the parents. They bring with them the parents of the parents. So there are grandmothers here, there are grandfathers here who don't know English at all. They need the Chinese service, see? So I think as transition, we still need that. But of course, if Chinese service could be integrated into an English church or into an international church, that should be the ideal. So that is the question. That is my answer to the first question. Okay. The second question is about whether we should train scholars so that they can teach in theological colleges. Oh, this has been happening all the time. I think we do not need to specially set up an institution to do that, because I believe that if a scholar is doing PhD, he should be competent enough in English. If it is not competent enough in English, not to mention French, Latin, and German, then it is not so good. Because as a doctoral student, as a scholar, you have to interact with worldwide leadership, right? So already many English universities and theological colleges are doing that. So we Chinese institutions, we do not have to do that. So I don't believe CITC have to do that. We don't have to train scholars. Let the other universities and theological colleges do that part.
Okay, we'll go with Sarah next.
Yeah.
Thank you for very interesting talk. My question, while I'm talking to you, I'm also thinking, I'm Iranian, and I have been involved in also this Iranian church leadership and all that kind of things. One of my, I know Iran is the growth of Christianity in Iran is different than China, because it still is than Hong Kong, because it still is a new thing. When it comes to the diocese, I always tend to see diaspora as an extension of the church back home. As you mentioned it, some of the Hong Kong people still are holding to their churches back home. Not only to the churches, to the culture and the language, because the language is not only speaking, let's say, Farsi or Cantonese or English. With that comes a much bigger package of cultural understanding and contextualization and all that kind of things. And what is, for example, as the churches in diaspora become more integrated into the culture of their new country, and what would be the application of that in let's say in the churches in Hong Kong? That is one of the things. Do we see, or should we see the diaspora churches as the extension of the home churches? And it's because again, coming from a persecuted church, I feel in some part of world, the diaspora church is a good hope for the church back home to survive or to become stronger. However, again, my worries is the diaspora church become more and more Western looking church, and even if they use Cantonese or Farsi, but still they use English materials in their teachings. And then another thing is when it comes to, let's say, listening to talk about the scholarship and looking around, suddenly we see all of our PhD scholars have been graduated in the West. And then again, with that, they bring also the very much Western theological and then the contextualization of the theology or the Bible still remains moving very slowly. And therefore, there are lots of things I personally struggle in my own scholarship between the diaspora, where the diaspora in relation to the home country stands and in relation to the contextualization of the theology. And do you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's while I'm asking you this question, I'm also thinking it is a kind of challenge I am facing.
Yes, yes, very good questions, very, very insightful observations. The first question is about whether the diaspora church can be seen as an extension of the persecuted church in the home church. In a sense, yes, but I would say yes and no. Yes, in a sense, is when the home church find it hard to grow and expand, they need a way out. And the diaspora church is a good opportunity. Now, the situation with Hong Kong is the same. Although in name, Hong Kong, there's still religious freedom. There is still freedom of worship in a sense in Hong Kong. But the fact is that some churches are feeling more restrictions, not as free as in the past. For example, in the past, Hong Kong churches find it comparatively easier to apply for the permission to open a Christian school. But in these past few years, it has become increasingly hard for a church to be able to obtain governmental permission to open a Christian school. You see? And so as a result, when Hong Kong churches, not exactly being persecuted as such, but when they find that there is less room, more restriction to expand, they need to expand. So how and where can they spend their missiological energy? And so they they move outwards to the UK. So that's why some Hong Kong churches are thinking of expanding or church planting in the UK now. In October, I will host 40 Hong Kong pastors and leaders. They will come to visit London, Edinburgh to see what they can do in the UK. They will want to ask this question. So that means you are right. The diaspora church become their extension, become their arm, their legs, and so on. And that is good in a sense, so that they will be more mission-oriented, they are more outward-looking, and so on. But on the other hand, I would say diaspora church cannot always just look back. The diaspora church have to be rooted in the UK soil. Because we're living in the UK, we have to interact with the UK culture. So we will encourage diaspora Chinese church to serve the neighborhood, to serve the community, to get to know the people around them. So I hope that the diaspora Chinese church will not just look back into the home city, that they should also look to serve the neighbors. You know, as the diaspora, the Jewish diaspora in Babylonia, being called to witness in Babylon. So the diaspora church should also take their root in the UK. Oh, sorry, I can't remember the second question. The second question is about, I remember now, about doctoral studies done in the UK. You are exactly right in saying that scholars educated in the West brought back Western mindset into their home country. And sometimes they don't know how to contextualize. That was the problem. You know, I was educated, my postgraduate education are all overseas in the UK, in America, and so on. So in a sense, I understand what you mean. You know, everything was Western. Even the way of doing exegesis, everything is very Western. Then when we go back to Hong Kong, we need to contextualize. This is the work that we scholars need to do, and we will have to work hard. But thankfully, the institutions in Hong Kong have already come of age. So just now I mentioned several universities and theological colleges in Hong Kong, they offer doctoral studies. So their doctoral studies are bound to be more China culture-based. So they will try to integrate Chinese culture and Western culture. And for us who receive purely Western education, we need to do that integration with Chinese culture ourselves. But we are happy to know that some Western institutions, even in the UK, are sensitive to our home culture. Say, for example, Nazarene Theological College in Manchester, of which we are trying to collaborate, they have recently set up a center for, I can't remember the name, it's called Asian Christianity or something, headed up by a Korean scholar. This lady, Korean scholar, tried to integrate a lot of Asian and Korean scholarship into Western scholarship. And that is what she's doing in Manchester. So I think things could be done here as well, as long as we are conscious in trying to integrate different cultures. Okay.
I agree.
David, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, Damon, and probably you already know Chinese Overseas Christian Mission. I think it's based in Milton Keynes, not too far from Oxford.
Yes, that's what I mentioned just now. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I know that they are engaged in evangelism work among Chinese students and also immigrants from different parts of China and Hong Kong.
Yes.
But they are also involved in doing what is called theological education by extension. And this, in a sense, addresses the question that Damon had, because they are educating Chinese Christians or converts to Christianity in theology, New Testament, and various other topics. I don't know if they are awarding degrees or if they have any validation connections with universities in the UK, but this program is going on according to the information I've just got. I have no idea who is funding this organization. You will probably know if they are funded by local churches here in the UK, or their funding emanates from back home in Hong Kong. I remember you said in your lecture that most of mission activities led by Chinese people in the UK are supported by Hong Kong Christians. So I'm assuming that in this case as well, funding is largely generated by Christians in Hong Kong. Is that the case?
Now, COCM, of course, just now I mentioned they offer theological education. Just now I mentioned they tried to do that on their own several decades ago, but they terminated it later. Right now, they are partnering with Canadian Chinese School of Theology, I mentioned just now. But they are currently offering only Mandarin programs. So they don't have Cantonese programs yet. Although Reverend Henry Liu is their chief executive. He said that they are thinking of offering Cantonese programs as well. So we have to wait to see. Now, whether their funding is mainly from Hong Kong or the UK, I'm not sure in their case. But up till a few years ago, a lot of the big projects are funded by churches in Hong Kong. I can take the example of the largest, I shouldn't say largest, but a very significant building of a Chinese church in Soho, London area. In Soho, there's a very prominent Chinese church with Chinese outlook, with Chinese look. That building, a lot of the funds came from Hong Kong churches, although it's a London church, a Chinese church in London. Whether COCM received the funds mainly from Hong Kong or not, I'm not sure. I cannot speak for them, okay? But I would say that, of course, the funds from the UK are increasing now with more and more people. And I'm sure COCM is also thinking of offering Cantonese theological education as well. And that will depend on which institution they can partner with. Because the institution they need to partner with has to be an institution using Cantonese. Otherwise, they can only offer Mandarin as yet. Because COCM is serving many groups of Chinese. Mandarin speaking, Cantonese speaking, BBC, British Chinese born, etc. So their work is very diverse. It is the largest mission organization in the UK.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
No, I have a question regarding, first of all, thank you for your presentation. Regarding the moral framework that seemed to come out in your lecture, and it could just simply be my own hearing. Like, for example, we need more Chinese scholars influencing Western academics. On the surface, I mean, these are things that I agree with. My question is, what is governing the moral framework? Second gen Chinese ought to have maintained some relationship with the first gen churches. these is-ought distinctions is what I'm really interested in. And just to give you kind of a little bit of a gateway here, the Korean churches in the US, especially the Korean Presbyterian churches, have already undergone a lot of the growing pains, or whatever you want to call it, demographic experiences that I think the Hong Kong churches here are experiencing, including second-gen church splits, 1.5 gen, and second-gen getting together to create a kind of a pan-Asian congregation, et cetera. And it always gets a bit concerning to me when I hear the parent generation saying, there's this moral framework that they're applying, saying, implying that their children shouldn't be doing this, or that they're disrespecting their mother church or their home church with their ambitions or desires to worship worship outside of their ethnic community or their ethnic group. So I might be applying that framework or those experiences to what I heard you say, but I'm just curious about how you're thinking through these distinctions versus a just demographic phenomenon that we see happening, throughout history. Thinking specifically in the U.S. of the Dutch Reformed churches or the Norwegian Reformed churches, where they're basically oblivion. They've gone into oblivion by now because their parenting generation, who's retained the language, retained the culture, couldn't or wouldn't or didn't pass it down to their later generation. So that's really the questions. What is the moral framework guiding your analysis of these demographic realities?
Yeah, these are really realities. There's always that kind of growing pains, as you said, as parents, bring up their kids and the kids prefer to go to another church. There are always this kind of struggles. So personally, I would prefer, that's why I would prefer an international church, as I said. I always espouse this kind of model. When the parents worship in a Chinese service, but within the same international church, whereas the children worship in the English service, but still within the same church. That is the ideal. So to tell you the truth, a few years ago, I was planning to plant such a church. But then because I have my hands full with theological education, I didn't have time to plant such a church. But that was my dream, under one umbrella.
Yeah.
When the parents can go to the service with their mother tongue, that they can feel very comfortable, knowing their children is very safe, knowing their children are just next door, but under one roof, still the same church, but it's an English service. That was the ideal. Otherwise, I think parents have to learn to accept this kind of change. And that's why I hope that our Chinese churches will slowly begin to educate the parents that you can't expect your children to follow your whole path. You can't expect, for example, your children to marry a Chinese. You have to let them go. They will marry a red hair, a Caucasian, any nationalities. You have to be prepared. And you have to be prepared. And you have to be prepared for them to go to another church. And so I think we have to educate the parents now. Yeah, this is no easy task. Yeah, I agree with you. No easy.
Well, thank you, Maureen, and just for an excellent letter, and also for just a really lively Q&A. And know that our prayers are with you in this very, very important work. And we've talked about it before, but it really is essential at this key strategic time. So we just ask God's blessings upon you and Spirit upon you in the churches in this exciting time when churches are growing.
Yes.
in the UK.
Yes.
By,
Yes,
by,
really
by
exciting.
300%.
Yes, you're right. Thank you so
What a
much.
wonderful phenomenon. So with that, blessings to you.
Thank
I
you.
look forward to seeing you soon. So
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
all of you. Thank you for all your questions and good feedback. Thank you. Yeah.
all right.
Thank you.